At 3 a.m., I heard my fiancé in the driveway. He's sleeping. Come over now. 30 seconds later, headlights pulled up. I'm not the type to wake up in the middle of the night unless something's wrong. I'm a heavy sleeper, always have been. But that night, at exactly 3 in the morning, I snapped awake. No nightmare, no noise from inside. It was something outside. A faint sound, like movement on gravel. Our bedroom window faces the driveway. I keep it cracked open because the air gets stuffy otherwise, so sometimes I hear raccoons or stray cats passing through. This wasn't that. I could hear muffled voices. I stayed still, letting my breathing stay slow so nothing seemed unusual if she happened to glance over. Then I caught it. Her voice, low but clear enough through the quiet night air. He's sleeping. Come over now. It didn't slam into me like a sudden punch. It was colder than that, like stepping into a freezer. For a second, I thought I must have misheard. But 30 seconds later, I saw the glow of headlights sweep across the wall. They pulled into the driveway like they'd done it before. I tilted my head just enough to see between the blinds. A black SUV rolled to a slow stop, engine running, lights dimmed. She was already walking toward it. Barefoot, in a hoodie I didn't recognize. She didn't look around nervously. She moved like someone who had rehearsed this. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. I didn't recognize him. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving like he knew exactly where he was going. He didn't greet her with words, at least not loud enough for me to hear, but they walked together toward the side gate leading to the backyard. Instead of bursting out like some jealous idiot, I stayed in bed, thinking fast. If I stormed out, all I'd get was a lie and maybe an argument that led nowhere. If I waited, I could figure out what was really going on. The gate clicked shut. I got up quietly, careful not to step on the one board in the floor that creaks. In the kitchen, I checked the time on the stove clock, 3:05 a.m. I pulled my phone out and opened the camera app, but I wasn't going outside. Not yet. First, I looked at the back door. Unlocked. That was the first detail. Then I noticed her phone wasn't on the counter where she usually left it at night. That meant she had it with her. That was the second detail. I grabbed my own hoodie, slipped into shoes, and stepped into the shadow between the fridge and the back hallway. From there, I had a partial view through the kitchen window toward the yard. No movement. I waited. At 3:12, the gate creaked again. She stepped in first, hair slightly messy now, still barefoot, but carrying something in her hand, a plastic grocery bag. Behind her, the man followed, head low. They didn't speak until they were almost at the side of the house. Then I caught just one phrase from him. Next time, earlier. My hands tightened in my pockets. He slipped out the gate again, and the SUV pulled away without any hurry. I waited until I could no longer see the taillights. Then I turned my attention back to her. She was moving toward the bathroom, still carrying the bag. I stayed where I was until I heard the shower turn on. That gave me about 10 minutes. I went straight to her handbag in the living room. It was half-zipped, and inside I found a tangle of receipts, gum wrappers, and makeup. But there was also a small folded paper, a pharmacy prescription slip, dated yesterday, in someone else's name. That was detail number 3. Next, I went to the kitchen counter where we kept the mail basket. Buried under a flyer, I found an envelope from a bank I didn't use. Her bank. I didn't open it yet, just took note. I returned to the bedroom before the shower stopped. When she came back in, hair damp and smelling faintly of soap, she didn't look surprised to see me awake. She just muttered something about not being able to sleep and wanting a snack. She slipped under the covers without another word. I lay there for the next hour, eyes closed but mind spinning. The next morning, I started testing boundaries. I left early for work, but doubled back 5 minutes later, saying I'd forgotten a file. She was already dressed, checking her phone with the kind of absorbed focus you don't have when you're just scrolling. When she saw me, she locked the screen so fast, it was almost muscle memory. That was detail number 4. The rest of the day, I kept my schedule normal on the surface, but every gap I had was spent digging. I remembered that our shared home Wi-Fi automatically stored connection logs. That meant I could check what devices were active while I was out. By the end of lunch, I had the data. Her phone had been connected to the Wi-Fi during the exact time I'd been gone last night, but so had an unknown device. Not a laptop. Another phone. Detail number 5. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. She was on the couch, watching TV, but I could tell her attention was split. Her phone stayed in her hand the whole time, and she kept it tilted away from me. Around 10 p.m., she went to bed early. I stayed up, pretending to watch something on my laptop, but listening for movement. At 11:20, I heard the faint vibration of her phone in the bedroom. Then, her steps toward the front door. When I peeked around the corner, she was standing by the window, looking out like she was checking for a ride. But after a minute, she went back to the bedroom, phone in hand. It was clear now. She was expecting something, but holding off. By the third day, I had a skeleton of her routine mapped out. The late-night movements, the unexplained items, the second phone and the Wi-Fi log. It all lined up with someone managing more than one relationship. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed to catch her in a pattern. So I started using a backup phone I had from years ago, one I could leave recording without her noticing. That night, I placed it behind the stack of cookbooks on the kitchen shelf, microphone facing the side door. At 3:04 a.m., it caught the gate opening again. Her voice. His voice. The same low, casual tone as before. I didn't just have the time now. I had proof. But I wasn't ready to confront her, not until I knew everything. By the time dawn broke on the fourth day, I was already sketching out my next move. If she thought I was predictable, I could use that. She believed I slept through everything. She believed I never checked the details. She had no idea I had already started building a timeline, with times, objects, and now audio. And I knew the next step wasn't to stop her. It was to let her keep going, just enough for her to make a mistake I could turn into something she couldn't talk her way out of. That night, I reset the plan. I stayed quiet, letting her think nothing had changed. But now, I was listening for every creak of the floorboards, every shift in the bed, every sound from the gate. Because the next time, I wouldn't just be waiting in the dark. I'd be waiting with the lights off, the car keys ready, and the dashcam running. She thought she was bringing her secret into my driveway. She didn't realize she was walking straight into a trap. I woke up that morning with one thought. If she was willing to risk having someone in our driveway in the middle of the night, then she was confident she wouldn't be caught. That kind of confidence usually came from practice. This wasn't her first time. I didn't touch the recording I'd made yet. That was for later. Right now, I needed to test how careful she really was in daylight. We had breakfast together. She talked about a coworker's birthday, about how she might need to stay late tonight for project deadlines. She barely looked at me except when she needed to read my reaction. I gave her nothing. By the time she left for work, I had my plan set. My job gave me flexible hours, so instead of going in, I parked 2 streets over from her office and waited. At 11:45 a.m., she came out. Not with coworkers, not with lunch in hand, but walking alone toward her car. She wasn't heading to any nearby cafe. She got in, pulled out of the lot, and took a road leading away from downtown. I followed, 2 cars back, never staying in her mirrors for long. She eventually parked on a narrow street lined with older houses. She walked past 2, then up to a small 1-story with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. I recognized the man instantly, the same guy from the SUV, leaning against the doorway, waiting for her. They went inside without knocking. I kept my phone recording, timestamp visible. I didn't go near the house, no point risking her spotting me. After about 40 minutes, she came out again, hair slightly disheveled, adjusting her sweater. The man stayed on the porch as she walked away, then went back inside. That was confirmation number 1. The next day, I needed something more concrete. Following her once could be written off as a coincidence in her mind. Catching her in a pattern? That would be different. So I spent the afternoon installing a small, motion-activated dashcam in my car that I could swivel toward any target. I also bought a basic GPS tracker online. By late evening, I'd attached it under her rear bumper, tucked where she wouldn't see it. The following morning, the GPS log showed her driving to work, except at 10:12 a.m., her car stopped for 25 minutes in the same neighborhood I tailed her to yesterday. The device pinged from that house again. That was confirmation number 2. On the third day, I noticed something else. She'd started making small cash withdrawals. $60 here, $80 there. Always on days she was staying late. The amounts weren't large enough to trigger suspicion from the bank, but they were frequent. This detail gnawed at me. Cash was harder to trace, which meant she was either paying him for something or avoiding a paper trail for shared expenses. Both possibilities were ugly. I added a new element to the plan, surveillance at home. I placed a small wireless camera behind a planter near the back gate. It blended in perfectly. That night, I left for drinks with friends, but parked a few streets over, watching the live feed on my phone. At 9:26 p.m., the camera picked up movement. The same man, slipping through the gate like he owned the place. He stayed only 15 minutes before leaving. She didn't follow him out, which meant she stayed inside after he was gone. Now I had him on video, not just audio. At this point, I had enough to confront her, but I wanted the kind of evidence she couldn't explain away even with the most elaborate lie. I wanted the whole picture, not just that she was seeing him, but how often, where, and why. So I went a step further and called in help. My friend Lewis works in private security and owed me a favor. I didn't tell him every detail, just that I suspected someone was showing up at my house without permission and that I needed to know who they were. Within 48 hours, Lewis had run the man's plates from the SUV and given me his full name. A quick search in public records turned up more than I expected. Prior arrests for fraud and one for assault. No stable job. Lived in a rental 2 towns over. This wasn't just some casual fling. She was involved with someone whose life was built on lies and opportunism. The next major move came the following weekend. She told me she was going to visit her sister. I smiled, wished her a good trip, and waited for her to leave. Then I checked the GPS tracker. She drove straight toward the highway but got off 2 exits later, pulling into the lot of a roadside motel. The GPS stayed there for 3 hours. Lewis and I split up. He watched the lot from one angle while I circled the block. Eventually, I saw them through the half-open curtains of a second-floor room. They weren't just talking. When they finally left, I kept a good distance but tailed them to a gas station. She went inside to buy something while he fueled the SUV. Lewis, from the opposite side, snapped photos of both of them with clear facial recognition. That was confirmation number 3, the one that locked everything in. By now, I was running 2 parallel investigations, tracking her physical movements and matching them to her financial transactions. Over the course of 2 weeks, a consistent schedule emerged. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she'd work late or visit her sister. Every Sunday afternoon, she'd take a drive to clear her head. Each one matched to either that old house, the motel, or, occasionally, my own driveway. It was almost mechanical, like clockwork. And that was her weakness. People can hide accidents, but they can't hide patterns forever. The final push in this stage came unexpectedly. She had a habit of leaving her laptop open when she went to shower. Normally, she logged out of everything. But one evening, she forgot to close a browser tab, a web-based messaging platform I'd never seen her use. I didn't touch anything, just read the most recent lines. The chat was with someone saved under the initials VR. The tone wasn't friendly or casual. It was personal, intimate, and full of planning. She'd mentioned me by name once, followed by "he's clueless," and "you should come by after midnight next week." The date matched a Tuesday. I didn't need to guess who VR was. By the end of that week, I had the evidence lined up. Audio recordings of them meeting at night in my driveway. Video of him entering and leaving my yard. GPS logs showing her car at his house and the motel. Photos of them together in public. Messages tying her directly to planned meetings with him. But I didn't move yet, because my gut told me there was one more layer to this. Something about those cash withdrawals and the frequency of their meetings that wasn't just romance or lust. If he had a history of fraud, and she was sneaking him cash, there was a decent chance she was involved in something much riskier than cheating. And if that was the case, I could bring it all down on both of them at once. I just needed one more week to be sure. That week, I let everything seem normal. I didn't follow her. I didn't check the GPS during the day. I wanted her to feel safe. On the 5th day, she set the trap herself. She told me she'd be home late on Thursday. At 10:15 p.m., the driveway camera pinged on my phone. He was there again. I watched the feed in real time as they talked briefly, then carried 2 grocery bags inside. She shut the gate behind them. Instead of rushing home, I stayed put, noting the timestamp. I wanted the full duration on record. 40 minutes later, the camera caught him leaving alone, empty-handed. This was the detail I'd been waiting for. If the bags were full going in and empty coming out, that wasn't just about seeing each other. Something was being dropped off or exchanged. And if I could figure out what, I'd have my final piece. The next part wouldn't just be about catching them. It would be about finding out what they were moving through my own house without my knowledge. Because now, I was starting to think this wasn't only betrayal. It was something that could land her in a lot more trouble than she realized. And if I played it right, I could make sure that trouble arrived exactly when I wanted it to. By now, every piece was on the table. The audio, the video, the GPS logs, the photos, the messages, all of it painted the picture. But the grocery bag detail from last time had shifted the game. This wasn't just a late-night hookup. They were moving something through my property, and that opened a new lane for leverage. I decided I needed to see exactly what was being passed between them. The next time they tried it, I wasn't just going to watch from a distance. I was going to be here, hidden, silent, close enough to catch the details without them realizing it. The following Tuesday, I staged another late work meeting. Before leaving, I parked my car 3 blocks away and came back on foot through the rear alley. Our property backed onto a narrow strip of woods, so slipping in through the back fence without being seen was easy. I set myself in the shed, door cracked just enough to give me a line of sight on the back gate. From here, I could see both the gate and the side of the house without being lit up by the motion sensor. At 9:18 p.m., the SUV appeared again. He stepped out, carrying a duffel bag this time instead of groceries. She met him at the gate, scanned the yard quickly, and let him in. They walked straight to the back door without hesitation. I crept out of the shed once they were inside and eased up to the kitchen window. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see him pulling sealed packages out of the duffel and placing them in a large plastic container on the table. It wasn't food. The packaging was too uniform, too careful. She handed him a thick envelope in return, the kind banks give for cash withdrawals. My suspicion turned from curiosity to certainty. Whatever this was, it wasn't legal. I pulled back into the shadows and started recording a voice memo, describing everything I was seeing in real time. That way, even if they caught me watching, I'd already have a timestamp to count. After he left 20 minutes later, I didn't follow him. Instead, I went inside like I'd just returned from work. She was in the shower, which meant whatever had been in that container was already hidden somewhere in the house. I moved fast. The container was gone from the kitchen, but I found it almost immediately in the guest room closet, tucked behind an old suitcase. Still sealed. I didn't open it. If this was what I thought it was, I didn't want my prints anywhere near it. Instead, I took a full set of high-resolution photos from every angle, barcodes, seals, even the manufacturer's markings on the tape. Then I put it back exactly how I'd found it. The next day, I called Lewis and laid it out straight. This wasn't just infidelity. I suspected she was holding or moving something that could land her in prison. Lewis told me something I'd been waiting to hear. If I could get law enforcement to show up when he was on the property, and if those packages were in plain sight, the case wouldn't just be about trespassing. That meant timing was everything. The trap had to be sprung when both the man and the packages were present. 2 nights later, I set the bait. I told her I was heading to a friend's cabin for the weekend. I packed a bag, left visibly in my car, but circled back in Lewis's truck, one she wouldn't recognize. We parked 2 streets away and watched the driveway via my live camera feed. At 11:02 p.m., the SUV rolled in. He got out with another duffel bag, bigger this time. She met him outside, and they went straight inside without even closing the gate behind them. I gave it 5 minutes. Then Lewis called in the report. Unwanted trespasser with a known criminal record currently inside a residence. From his phone, using my address, but his own name. When the squad car pulled up 8 minutes later, we stayed out of sight. The officers went straight for the gate, flashlights cutting across the yard. Through the side window, I could see him freeze mid-step, a package still in his hand. They knocked once, then opened the door when she didn't answer. Legally, they could. The report had been made by someone claiming to live here, and they had probable cause to detain a known offender on the premises. The moment they stepped inside, his hands went up. She started talking fast, but it didn't matter. The packages were in plain sight on the table. Lewis and I came around only after they'd already escorted him out in cuffs. I walked straight inside, calm, like I'd just arrived from my trip. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not surprised I was there, but terrified about what this meant. She kept asking why I called the police. I didn't answer. I just stood there as the officers cataloged the packages and read her rights. Yes, they took her too. Because possession isn't just about ownership, it's about control. And she'd been standing right there, helping him unpack when they arrived. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled silence. She was released on bail faster than I expected, but he stayed in custody. The packages tested positive for stolen electronics, part of a shipment lifted from a warehouse 2 counties away. That tied him to an active burglary investigation and her to possession of stolen goods. I didn't need to fabricate anything. I didn't need to embellish. I just had to hand over the photos, the GPS logs, and the timestamps. When the detective asked me why I had all this, I told him the truth. I'd suspected someone was coming onto my property without permission, and I documented everything for safety. That was enough to keep me clear of the mess, while keeping her buried in it. By the end of the week, she'd moved out, not because she wanted to, but because I'd filed for a temporary restraining order citing the trespassing, the police call, and the risk to my safety from her associate. It was granted in less than 24 hours. I boxed her things and left them on the porch with a note listing the date and time she could collect them under police escort. She came once, eyes down, saying nothing. She didn't ask about us or try to spin a story. I think by then she knew there wasn't a single version of this that didn't make her look exactly like what she was. If it had just been about her sneaking someone into my driveway, I could have ended it quietly. But once I realized stolen property was moving through my house, there was no walking away. Her choices weren't just hers anymore. She'd made me a silent participant by proximity. If the police had caught wind of those packages without my side of the story, it wouldn't have been her alone they were questioning. This way, I didn't just get out clean. I made sure the people who actually broke the law took the weight of it. When I look back now, I realized the first stage was about hearing that one damning sentence at 3 a.m. The second was about proving she was lying. But this was where the trap closed, where her secret life stopped being her private game and became something the law cared about. And there was still one final card to play, because the court case was coming, and with it, the chance to make sure she couldn't rewrite history in her favor. The weeks after her arrest felt strangely quiet. The SUV never came back. The driveway camera stayed uneventful. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a place where I had to watch every shadow. But the silence wasn't the end. It was the pause before everything she had built for herself collapsed in court. Her arraignment came first. I didn't have to be there, but I went anyway. I sat far back in the gallery and watched her walk in wearing a plain blouse and dark pants, hair tied up like she was trying to look respectable. Her lawyer whispered to her constantly, but she never looked around the room to see if I was there. The charges against her were read, and though she pled not guilty, the evidence laid out by the prosecutor in that short session already told me this was going to be bad for her. The photos, the timestamps, the packages, the police report, all of it lined up too neatly. What I hadn't expected was the separate charge they announced for her companion. He wasn't just being held for possession and burglary. He was being tied to a string of thefts across 3 counties, and the state was consolidating cases. That meant his trial would be bigger, messier, and full of people willing to testify against him to get lighter sentences. By the second hearing, my name was officially listed as a witness. The detective I'd spoken to early on told me to be ready to testify not just about what I'd seen, but about the steps I took to document it. I gave them everything: the GPS logs, the audio, the video, the photos of the packages. The DA's office didn't just thank me. They started treating me like a cooperating informant, which meant my side of the story was now the official one. That was exactly where I wanted to be. Word started spreading in her circle. Mutual friends who'd been distant started reaching out, not to apologize, but to ask for details. They wanted to know if it was true that she'd been arrested in my kitchen, with stolen property on the table. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The plain facts were already bad enough. Her family didn't contact me directly, but I know they heard. A neighbor who still speaks to her parents told me there had been a screaming match in their house when the arrest became public record. A month later, she tried to call me. I didn't answer. Then I got an email from her lawyer asking if I'd consider a meeting to clear the air. I ignored it. Whatever she wanted, it wasn't going to help me, and I didn't owe her the dignity of a conversation. I'd spent enough time listening to her talk her way around things when I didn't have the proof. Now that I had it, I didn't need her explanations. The trial date finally arrived for her partner. She testified on his behalf, or at least she tried to. From what I heard later, her statement was riddled with contradictions. She couldn't keep her story straight about why he was in my house, why the packages were there, or why she had cash ready for him. The prosecutor tore it apart, piece by piece, and the jury didn't take long to deliberate. He was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to several years in prison. Her own case took a different turn. With him gone and no one to shield her, her lawyers started negotiating. In exchange for a guilty plea to a lesser charge, she'd avoid prison but serve a year of probation, pay fines, and perform community service. It still went on her record. For someone who had always been careful about her image, that mark was going to follow her for the rest of her life. I didn't attend her sentencing. I didn't need to watch her try to look remorseful for the judge. I was more interested in what came next. With the restraining order still in place, she couldn't come near me, and with the conviction on her record, her professional life started to unravel. The job she'd been so proud of quietly let her go. Mutual acquaintances told me she tried to apply elsewhere, but background checks and whispered rumors kept getting in the way. I sold the house not long after. There was no reason to keep living in a place that held so much of her shadow. I used the sale as a chance to relocate, choosing a smaller place in a quieter area. The cameras came with me, not because I expected the same thing to happen again, but because once you've seen how easily someone can turn your home into a stage for their double life, you don't stop being careful. Every now and then, I'd see her name in court dockets online. Minor infractions, usually failures to meet probation requirements or missed community service hours. It told me everything I needed to know about whether she'd learned anything from this. I thought about the night it all started more than once. The sound of her voice at 3 a.m., telling someone he could come over because I was sleeping. At the time, it felt like a small crack in the wall. Now I could see it for what it was. The first clear sign that the life I thought I had wasn't real. The best part of all of it was how little I had to say in the end. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting match where she could twist my words. Just silence, evidence, and the weight of her own actions closing in on her. The law had done what it was supposed to do, and I'd walked away without a single false charge sticking to me. Some people would call it luck. I call it preparation. The moment I suspected something, I didn't just react. I started collecting proof. I didn't tip my hand too soon. And when the right moment came, I let the trap close on its own. That's why I never once had to defend myself in court. Never once had to explain away something I couldn't prove. Her life after all of this became smaller. Mine didn't. I rebuilt, quietly and on my own terms, without the weight of her lies or the risk of her chaos dragging me down. The people who had once believed her stories didn't anymore, not after the public record showed exactly what happened. And the people who knew me before this didn't change how they saw me. If anything, they respected me more for not letting it drag me into a mud fight. It's strange how one overheard sentence in the middle of the night can set off a chain of events that ends with court cases, convictions, and entirely separate lives. But that's what happened. She made her choices, and I made mine. And in the end, her world got smaller while mine opened up again. The last time I saw her was by accident, months after everything was over. She was walking out of a grocery store, paper bag in hand, head down. She didn't see me. I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Everything worth saying had already been said in the form of police reports, court filings, and a record that would follow her for years. It wasn't revenge in the way most people imagine it. There was no shouting in the street, no satisfaction from watching her cry. It was quieter than that, and far more permanent. The best consequence is the one that doesn't need you to keep it alive. And so, I left it there. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.